Hello, I'm Joanne Turnquist, President and CEO of Central Carolina Community Foundation, an organization that is focused on philanthropy and philanthropic collaboration. Today, I am delighted to talk to you about our On the Table initiative. For the last 3 years, thousands of residents across Richland and Lexington counties have gathered around tables to talk about how to make our community stronger. This year, as our community worked to overcome the pandemic and address long-standing racial equity issues, On the Table was an opportunity to gather for meaningful conversations, build personal connections, and explore how we can work together to build a livable, equitable, and just community for everyone. Today, we're delighted, as I said, to share our key insights from the last 3 years of On the Table. In addition to the information gleaned from our On the Table conversations and survey results, we also drew upon our work as a philanthropic collaborator, the Knight Foundation's Community Ties Study, and EngenuitySC's Competitiveness Report. Our On the Table survey respondents represent a wide cross-section of our community. In fact, for the last 3 years, over 20% of the participants have responded to the survey. However, it's important to note that the respondents represent a small, highly engaged segment of our community. The insights you hear today, while backed up with data, are the key lessons we have learned through this work, not scientific research. Before sharing our insights, we'd like to thank First Citizens and the Knight Foundation for making our On the Table possible. We'd also like to thank our Ambassador Committee and our incredible co-chairs, Corey Manning and Cliff Bork, for bringing a diversity of voices to the discussion of who we are, our vision for the future, and what we can do together to get there. We will now hear from our 5 On the Table leaders about our insights from the past few years. After each insight, each speaker will present you with a reflection question. I encourage you to engage with us through the chat box. In addition, following the insights and stories, we'll have a live Q&A. If you have questions during the Q&A, please type them into the chat. And in fact, if you have questions as we go along, type them in now. And now, on to our first insight.
Hi, I'm Sharon Bryant, and I am the chairman of the Central Carolina Community Foundation, and I'm also the regional president for First Citizens Bank here in Columbia, South Carolina. Why do we support On the Table? On the Table is all about communication. It is about listening and learning and doing so many things in our community. So we're very excited to be a part of something that facilitates talking, listening, learning, and loving together. After 3 years of On the Table, we have seen that people in our community have a strong desire to engage in meaningful dialogue and form deep connections. On the Table adds a diversity of voices to the discussion of who we are, where we're going, and what we can do to get there. We have heard from hundreds of individuals how appreciative they are for the opportunity to connect with others and to have their voice heard. In 2020, the importance of connecting with others was even more important. During an unprecedented year where we were constantly told to stay apart, we put our differences and stresses aside to have important conversations about this community. Over 750 individuals gathered in 2020 through safe, virtual social distance conversations to connect, listen, and learn from each other. In addition to our conversations with community members, our survey respondents have also indicated that connecting through meaningful dialogue is a priority. In our 2019 results, more than 9 in 10 respondents believe that people coming together from across the area is critical to developing solutions to community challenges. Respondents across the years have also indicated that participating in these conversations has increased their understanding of the issues affecting the community and helped them connect with new individuals in the community that they do not already know. As we wrap up this insight and hear our first story of impact, I encourage you to respond to the following question in the chat. What benefits have you seen through connecting with others through On the Table or other meaningful interactions?
Well, we began our On the Table experience with the Auntie Karen Foundation through our relationship and partnership with Karen Alexander Banks, and it was awesome. She invited us to an On the Table experience, she called it, and we showed up with our potluck dinner and representing the Latino community, and it was really fun, and we were able to discuss really important community matters, and impactful conversations took place that evening. And some partnerships grew from that evening that we were able to continue forward. And then, of course, 2 years ago, we had our own On the Table, and we had our first Chicas Chat, which was awesome. And that, of course, involved Latina youth, that we wanted to create a safe space where they could discuss any range of topics that they felt they could not discuss in a school setting and or in their home setting, and we were able to open that up in a 2-hour discussion. It was something that was thought of to be a little taboo within our own Latino community, speaking to our youth and young adults about what fears they had and what anxieties they had, what they couldn't quite discuss with their parents, but yet and still it's woven into the fabric of every youth's life, right? So in that, we were able to create these bonds and say, hey, this is what we did 2 years ago. Do you think we can repeat this, but now we can repeat it with groups downtown and with groups in Lexington, not just the group in Columbia on the northeast or on the southeast of Columbia, but just kind of open that gateway of conversation. But I think that the more we get to know one another, the more we get to learn from one another, the more understanding we'll gain, 1. 2, the more we'll learn from one another on how to serve our community, which is the point of being a nonprofit to begin with. And 3, the more we'll come to an understanding of how to honor one another with our respect and moreover with our love. And I think that that is the key right now, that we need to get back to the root of what we do. And that is, we all entered into this space to honor our community, respect our community, and above all, love our community.
Overall, people are positive about our community and optimistic for the future. But we still need to collaborate to create a livable, equitable, and just community for everyone. During all 3 years of On the Table, survey respondents approached the issues and challenges facing their communities with a strong sense of hope for the future. In the 2020 survey, over 90% of respondents indicated they were hopeful about what the future holds for our community. This was consistent with the responses from the previous 2 years. The majority of respondents indicated that the community is the perfect place for people like them, and that there are shared goals and priorities for our community. While 63% of 2020 respondents felt the community provides opportunities for everyone, white respondents see their community in these positive terms at a higher rate than Black participants and other participants of color, showing an area of opportunity for our community to address. It is important to note that these positive sentiments are contrasted by data from other surveys across the region. In the Knight Foundation's Community Ties study, 53% of Columbia residents surveyed would choose to stay if given the choice to live elsewhere, compared to a national average of 58%. This 5% gap is statistically significant and demonstrates a need to continue to work to create a livable, equitable, and just community for everyone. As we wrap up this insight, we want to hear from you. Comment in the chat your answer to this question. Are you hopeful for the future of our community? Why or why not?
My involvement with Central Carolina is about two years old now. We first came around and looked at how could we bring not only the community of Lexington into the conversation, but understanding how we fit into a greater whole. As we look at the communities around the Midlands area, how do we understand all the different pieces that impact individual lives, how it impacts us as a community, and then how do we come together and try to resolve and speak to some of those problems. I think the thing that I love most about being a part of On the Table is hearing the stories. Because by hearing the stories, you gain different perspectives, and we all have them. But how do you learn more about the individuals who share them, the communities and the places they come from? But how do we work together to address greater change from a community level? I think On the Table has strengthened us really across the community by bringing a lot of different viewpoints that perhaps had we not gathered, we wouldn't fully appreciate or be informed of. So I think it's strengthened us across the board as we care for the community. Something I love to share with people from a community perspective. We're only as healthy in a community as we're willing to address problems and address change. And when you're willing to stand in that gap and to lead forward, you really can make a difference. And I believe that On the Table has really taken us a long way with that. From On the Table, I think some of the key outcomes as I look at the individuals who attended, but also the actions they took afterwards. You know, how they continued conversations, how they were willing to go back to their places of work, places of worship, their places where they do life, and share some of those outcomes, share some of the challenges perhaps they had learned more about, and then look to stand in that gap and figure out, okay, how do we come around this? You know, how can we partner with others? What resources do we have by way of our community, by way of our companies? How do we individually invite people to see that greater vision and address the need for the benefit of everyone? I think On the Table is changing our community probably on a couple of different levels. One, it brings awareness. You know, so there's a lot that we can learn from each other, but I think it also provides hope and access for many folks who perhaps wouldn't have a voice in what's important. So I think it's a win-win for everyone, and the more we can keep the conversation flowing and going, in my mind and heart, there's never been a more important time to get to know each other. There's never been a more important time for us to recognize each other as neighbors, but also take those distinctive leadership steps forward to make our communities healthy and whole.
Young people are our future. While we are continuing to work on engaging more youth in our On the Table initiative, we know that including their voice is essential to make our community stronger. Our youth-led conversations have deepened our knowledge and understanding of how local issues affect residents of all ages. While we have yet to have a statistically significant number of youth participate in our survey, we have learned from their conversations and the notes they have submitted to us. Our youth participants have indicated that racism, discrimination, violence, gangs, and quality of schools are all key issues for our community to address. They also share a strong desire to be involved in the community and believe they can make an impact, but are unsure how to be involved and feel that time is a huge barrier. Increasing the youth involvement will continue to be a priority for us as we move forward. Before hearing from our youth, I ask you to answer this question in the comments. How can we further engage youth in these conversations?
I've hosted 3 On the Table discussions at my high school, Westwood High School, and with each discussion I've tried to grow in a level of diversity. My most recent On the Table discussion I've actually paired with my high school, Westwood High School, and another nonprofit organization called Serve and Connect, and we talked about community policing and how high schoolers specifically can build positive relationships with police officers. I applied for a Beyond the Table grant that Central Carolina Community Foundation offers, and we plan to really host panel discussions with high schoolers and police officers to talk about what you do in certain instances. So if you get pulled over by a police officer, how should you act? What is okay to do? What will make the police officer uncomfortable? What can the police officer do to ensure that you're comfortable as a high schooler? We always used to talk about what would we do in certain instances, because right now the controversial issues and the things that happen in our society usually happen whenever there's an interaction between law enforcement and minorities. And so we really were confused on how should we act in this situation. Should we demand answers while we were pulled over, or should we participate and try to remain as level-headed as possible? So it really happened just through open dialogue, and we thought hey, who can answer these questions better than law enforcement themselves? Why don't we try to get us together? I've enjoyed bringing a large group of people together who come from different backgrounds and have different opinions, and being able to have an open and honest dialogue. And really, whenever you have these conversations, you'll see people want to go about and take different routes to improve their community. But at the end of the day, everybody is really focused on what can we do to make our community better. I think On the Table has impacted our community in numerous ways. I think it's helped people deepen their connections to one another, and I think it's also showed people that you can really disagree respectfully and just have open and honest dialogue. I would tell my peers that you have a voice. At first, whenever I hosted On the Table, I was just like, oh, who's going to listen to me, or why would I host this? Because nobody's going to take it seriously. But as a youth, you can do something. You don't have to sit around and wait till you're 18 or older. You can do something now and speak out now. People are willing to listen.
Our next insight is across a variety of sources, the areas of opportunity remain consistent. In our survey over the last 3 years, we asked participants to select which issues they think are the most important for the community to address. Their answers were consistent across all 3 years. This is significant considering over 60% of respondents from the last 2 years were new to On the Table, and each year had variations in both the sample size as well as the diversity of the participants. The top priority for our community to address, consistent across the last 3 years regardless of geographic or demographic diversity, is economic development and good paying jobs. Housing issues, race relations, poverty, and education were also in the top. In 2020, reducing hunger and food insecurity was a new top issue, a likely result to the urgent needs brought on by the COVID pandemic. In order to move forward in addressing these issues, we can draw on the insights gained from the Knight Foundation's Community Ties study and EngenuitySC's Competitiveness report, both which provide tangible action steps to improve attachment of residents and our region's competitiveness. In fact, many of these steps are already being taken through the Midlands Leadership Business Group, who has used the data from these reports and On the Table to inform their projects. We will continue to share and explore how residents can take action in these priority areas through our Table Talk series and upcoming On the Table conversations. To wrap up this insight, please comment your answers to the following question. What top issues are you interested in learning more about?
Our organization got started with the notion that we couldn't do it by ourselves, whatever our goals were, and we were looking for partnerships, and of course we immediately came to the foundation and forged a partnership with them. And then we began, as a result of being in experiences like On the Table, when we became more aware of other organizations doing the work in philanthropy and all of that, that we could partner with them. So we did, I think one of our major partners is Historic Columbia, and we've been with them for several years. You know, volunteering services. What I appreciate most, it is a different kind of venue to have the kinds of discussions that we have, you know, within our organization and across our partners and others about what the need is, how deep it is, and what we can do in coalition to help mediate those problems of whether it's poverty or educational issues or whatever. Our organization currently does not have a single issue focus. We may wind up doing that because we are now more and deeply aware of some of the issues and may want to devote our resources. On the Table provided opportunities to come across people I would not have personally necessarily been able to see at the time I saw it. It's sort of synergistic. It's kind of, it happens at sort of the right time because organizations like the foundation would set up the opportunity by a panel or some event where you have speakers and so on. And I said, oh, I gotta meet that lady, I gotta meet that guy. I might not have been able to do that had I had not been connected. And so I think that's an important aspect of On the Table. It's momentary, but even that hour and a half that we are at the table, you meet somebody, and if you connect, it's like, been knowing them forever, and we trade cards and all that. So that's a direct benefit.
We've learned that when we collaborate, when we have meaningful dialogue with others and take the time to listen and learn from each other, change happens. Your voice matters, but your actions matter too. During the last 3 years of On the Table, 9 in 10 respondents reported that they will likely take specific action on an issue they discussed at On the Table. And they are. As you heard throughout today, ripples of action inspired by these conversations are taking place throughout our communities. Indeed, the Central Carolina Community Foundation has granted nearly $60,000 to 32 projects inspired by On the Table conversations. On the Table is about inspiring our community to take action. The conversations may be the starting point, but they are not the end. We hope today's insights inspire you to move beyond the table, to continue to connect with your neighbors, to learn about issues facing our community, and to take a step today towards improving our community. Our final reflection question for today is as follows. How will you take action to make our community stronger?
In the past 6 months or so, my neighborhood association has really been focusing on the fact that we live in a food desert, and how in North Columbia there are very few grocery stores. Our closest grocery store, which was a Bilo, then became a Harvey's. Primarily what we're concerned about is fresh food, because we thought about ways we could address that problem. And we have a member who has a building that's essentially empty, and so we decided to begin to set up a farmer's market. And our neighbor is letting us use his building, and right now it's just going to be once a week, but we'll see if it can expand past that. But we're working with a couple of farmers who are going to bring their fresh produce to really the center of the neighborhood. So we think that it's going to be something that's really going to help people in the neighborhood. One thing that was really interesting that happened as a result of applying for this grant was that we are not, although we are planning to become, we're not right now a 501c3. So we had to find an umbrella organization to work with us who had a 501c3, and it turned out to be our neighbors from Earlwood. Their neighborhood association is a 501c3. And now this is a neighborhood that it borders ours. It's very nearby, it's adjacent, but we, in my experience, and I was the president of the neighborhood association for 3 years and have not been for 2 years, so in a long time, I've never known us to really interact with the Earlwood Neighborhood Association. And but we reached out to them, and they were very happy to provide, their fiscal sponsorship, and I think, to get to know us a little better. I think the whole idea of being a food desert and of the imbalance between availability of fresh food among different groups of people, I think that discussion has deepened all of us. That is really important, and it isn't something that had necessarily risen to the top of our discussions previously, but now it is very much something that we bring up. We meet once a month, and we talk about it every month, but it's been very gratifying to be in such a diverse part of the city, and then to have these conversations amongst ourselves about the issues that are important to us.
Close. Stand and sit up straighter.
Take a breath.
It should be under 2 minutes.
Okay.
White with the
Face to white with the logo.
Okay, there we go.
Thank you for joining us today for our On the Table reveal. We hope that you enjoyed the insights that were shared by all of the participants. I'm joined today by Sharice Arendale, our Director of Strategic Initiatives and Communications, and Elizabeth Hauk, our Strategic Initiatives Associates. We will be moving into our live question and answer period. Our associate Lee Goebel, who is also here with us, will be receiving the questions that you type into the chat box. He'll read them to us, we'll repeat them, and then Sharice, Elizabeth, and I will answer them. So please begin writing down your questions so we can answer them. And while you do that, I'd like to take a moment to thank EngenuitySC for inviting us to participate in their Competitiveness series this year. Obviously, everything is virtual, so here we are in our boardroom with our masks on, awaiting your questions. So Lee, do we have a question? So we did have a question, and the question was, what happens after our on-the-table conversations? How can we ensure that the ideas that we're sharing have a future? Elizabeth, could you help us with that?
Absolutely, Joanne. So after On the Table, of course, there's the week-long conversations that happened this past year, October 4th through the 10th. And after, there's the meet, share, and do. So people hopefully met and made those great connections in those virtual
or socially distanced conversations, and then hoping that they share their ideas among each other. Those ideas were able to become actionable through the Beyond the Table grants, where participants could apply for up to $2,000 in grants. So we are very proud to say that we awarded 10 projects for a total of $19,500 in a range of categories, including arts and culture, race relations, education, youth, public safety, and more. Also, what happens is our ongoing conversations through our Table Talk series, which dive deeper into the topics that floated to the top from the On the Table survey. So our first will be coming up here on food insecurity, which was actually a new point of topic that came up this year. And that will be on March 9th. Registration is already open to that, so if you want to check that out, it's on onthetable.cola.org. We'll also be having table talk conversations on social justice, which will be coming up May 18th, as well as on affordable housing on July 13th. Affordable housing is actually a part 2 of a conversation that we had last year, and so there's still, of course, a lot of interest. And so hopefully that'll bring people into more action after learning more about how they can get engaged and get involved in their communities.
Thanks, Elizabeth. And while you were sharing the next steps, we had another question. And Sharice, I'll ask your help in answering this. The question is, as we continue to face COVID, if things open up, will On the Table be virtual or in person next year?
Of course, that's a great question. So as you might have heard through today's video, during the COVID pandemic last year, we did hold conversations both virtually and in person. And we do plan to continue to offer both options going forward into the future. Hopefully the in-person conversations will be able to be a little closer together, but we'll of course always follow the protocols that our health officials are telling us and recommend safety guidelines as we move forward this year. And now that we know how to do things virtually, we'll be continuing those conversations as well and providing toolkits and training for hosts on how to do those virtual conversations.
Thanks, Sharice, and I think Lee has a couple of additional questions to pitch over here.
Yes, so a question from Web Girls Code is, what, if any, past initiatives are still showing success in the areas?
All right, so the question from We Girls Code, Web Girls Code, is what past initiatives are still showing success after they were launched? So I'm assuming that that means grants from last year or conversations from last year. So Elizabeth.
Yes, that's a great question. So thanks for that, Web Girls Code. I know one of course, each year we've awarded roughly between 10 and 11 projects for funding. So this is now our third year. I know one that readily comes to mind is actually Chicas Chat, which was started by Latino Communications. And this is a mentorship program between Latina girls and other Latina women in the area about issues most pressing that they maybe can't feel more comfortable talking to adults who are already in their life or talk to people at school about. And so that's been an ongoing initiative that has actually changed in a couple of ways, but certainly is one that comes to mind. There's also some that are sort of evergreen. So there is the establishment of a healthy food map that was created a while back. And so that's one that still continues to show where healthy foods are in our area. And so those are two that readily come to mind. Of course, we do have more information on those past participants on our website, but those are, I think, really great examples of how these projects that start as these actionable ideas, because granted, it's only $2,000, and so how they morph and change over time and, possibly partner up with other people in the future.
Thanks, Elizabeth. And we've had a lot of anecdotes of folks that have met during a table talk who've continued to get together during the year, perhaps not about a specific issue, but rather to share ideas and talk about how they can work together. Lee, another question.
Yes, from Megan Hickman.
From Megan Hickman at EngenuitySC.
Of the 10 projects, are there any that want to continue or still need funding, or which ones could keep going now that they've been launched?
Thank you. So from Engenuity, it's Megan Hickman. The question is, of the previous 10 awarded grants, are there any that if they were to get additional funding could continue and expand? And Elizabeth, I'll pass that to you again.
Yes, all these great questions about funding, which makes a lot of sense. We are Central Carolina Community Foundation, so I can see why dollars might be on the brain. So one of the projects is actually from this past year of the Irmo Community Garden, which is being started up by the Ivy Heritage Foundation. This is a group of really a much larger project. Of course, this is a mini grant of $2,000, but they have projected roughly $18,000 that they needed to reach their goal. And so they're doing what they can in these next 6 months for the grant period, but I know that in order to be able to dig up the old tennis court, the area that they want to use, that's really central in the Irmo community, and being able to offer continued education projects and that sort of thing connected to that garden, that is one that needs more funding. There's also the Frame by Frame Film Club, actually, and they want to be able to do sustained programming as well. So this $2,000 helps them to be able to get people talking about film, mostly for Black, Indigenous people of color living in the South, but they do want to continue this initiative well past beyond the table grant.
Thanks, Elizabeth. And if anyone is interested in learning more about how they can help sustain some of these programs, please reach out to Elizabeth Hauk at Central Carolina Community Foundation. And our information can be found at yourfoundation.org. Lee.
A question from Sean Skillman. How can we diversify on-the-table participants? How can more people participate in this opportunity?
Great. So a question from Sean Skillman at Ag First, and the question is, how can we diversify the participants in On the Table? How can we expand our reach so that more voices are heard? And I'll turn that to Sharice.
Of course. Thank you, Joanne. And that's a great question. Thank you, Sean, for asking that. One of the main ways that you can help us with diversifying the participation of On the Table is you can volunteer to be an On the Table ambassador. You might have heard us talk about our ambassadors several times during today's video. And what our ambassador committee does is help us with outreach. They really promote On the Table to their network. They encourage people to host, to participate, and really just lift up the initiative in general by sharing their stories. So if you're interested in helping us reach more voices, we could use your help with being an ambassador. We'll be recruiting for ambassadors probably beginning May or June of this year. So look for an email from us or some information on the Community Foundation platforms, and we'll be asking for volunteers to be ambassadors. I would also encourage, if you're interested in hosting next year, and next year's conversations will be October 3rd through the 9th, that you reach out into your own network and invite your friends and family to host, to participate, and ask them to invite their friends and family. And the more that we reach out into people's network, the more we're going to continue to reach a variety of voices across our community.
Thank you, Sharice. All right. So again, our time is drawing to a close. I would like to again thank all of you for tuning in. I'd like to thank EngenuitySC for inviting us to be a part of this series. I'd like to thank First Citizens Bank for helping us underwrite this work, and the Knight Foundation for also providing financial support. One thing the pandemic has really brought to light is the fact that connections with others is so key and critical, and we've missed that. And when we do come together, as we have with On the Table, lots of voices are heard and lots of ideas get shared, and our community grows and our community thrives and connections are made. Connections that are so valuable, especially today when it's easy to feel isolated. So I encourage all of you to consider participating next year, reaching out to your networks, draw people into the conversation about how we together can make our community stronger and safer and more just and more vibrant and more livable. Because when we do that together, nothing is insurmountable. So again, thank you to all of you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at our table talks and next year's On the Table conversation. Thank you, and see you later.